My name is Marlon Kuntze. My talk today is about reading the word and reading the world, and if in fact those experiences are similar or different. That's the question that I pose today. English for hearing people and English for deaf people are most certainly not the same. When you ask a deaf person what English means, it's a written form of a language. And when you ask a hearing person what English is, it's the spoken form and the written form of their language. So I will suggest today two premises. Learning to read is fundamental. We learn to read using the information that we are presented on a daily basis. If we are exposed to language, either in spoken or signed or written form, that information is processed by our brain and we acquire that skill of reading the world. The world provides us so many patterns throughout our daily lives. We are inundated with them, and that helps us to read anything. We read all the time. We read the world in many different forms. We can see patterns and recognize them. Reading the world is only one small part. Word is only one small part of our daily experience. My fundamental question is reading the word and reading the world from a psychological perspective. Is that a fundamental similarity, or is it in fact a different way that we process information? As I mentioned before, we have so much information that we take in on a daily basis that we only absorb part of it. But what we do absorb becomes what is known, and then we no longer have to pay attention to it as much. What is known then frees up more cognitive ability to pay attention to what the unknown is. So we take in information, and if we have seen that pattern before, we can sort of let it go because we are familiar with it. For example, a cat. We all know what a cat looks like. There are different kinds of cats, different cats that have different colors and patterns. We know what the properties are. But when we see an animal that looks a little bit different, they may have taller ears, they may have a different color, fur, they may have a different shape, in fact, to their body. It takes a moment. We understand that they come from the feline family, but then we are recognize that, in fact, this is a different cat. We go through that sort of analysis because that is not something that we have put into our brain as something that is known. The known patterns that we have learned throughout our daily being, again, is information that we can store and free up brain space for new patterns that we're looking for. For example, if I did see a cat, I may think of it as a cat and then upon further observation realize that it's a different animal. We can think of dogs as another example. We all know that dogs have certain properties, but we may look at an animal and take a closer look and realize that, in fact, it's a different type of animal that may look similar to a dog, but comes from a different family. So that information that is unknown forces us to take a closer look. Walking through the forest, a novice may come upon some animal footprints, but we may not be able to recognize what footprints come from which animal or what stories they represent. There are different types of hoofs, for example, many different types. Are you able to identify what hoof belongs to which animal? Perhaps there is a deer, and someone who's familiar with deer can identify a deer's footprint pattern. But another person who is a novice or hasn't had that familiar experience or been exposed to that pattern wouldn't know what type of animal had walked there before them. But if you were, in fact, to show someone two different types of feet, or a paws, pardon the interpreter, then you would be able to compare and see that maybe one is a shoehorn goat compared to another deer. Sheep have much narrower footprints than other animals. And then that information becomes what is known, and our minds are free to focus on patterns that we have not yet been exposed to, such as maybe the footprint of a pig or a goat. So it does take a while for our brains to discern information that is known and what is unknown. But basically, we all have a theory of the world that we work within. And that's based on our cumulative experiences, the information that we've been exposed to and use, the data that is constantly being shown to us. That informs our theory, and our theories about the world changes on a daily basis depending on the data which we receive. I may be fascinated by a new piece of data, and that will in turn shift my theory. Let's go back to reading and how one learns to read. As I mentioned before, we're inundated with patterns, and the written form of a language is one such pattern. For example, the alphabet and the way we arrange letters to create words and sentences is very much a pattern in our language. As you see, there are sublexical items coming up on the screen now that can be replaced with letters in the beginning to make different vocabulary words. For example, the sublexical term IRE can predict what would be before that sublexical item. IRE stays constant, and the letters that come before that sublexical item can be changed to be wire or haywire, aware, beware. Again, the sublexical is a pattern that we are familiar with, and then that leaves more brain energy to pay attention to the letters that come before the sublexical item to be able to, in fact, read and comprehend that word. And that information becomes what is known. Our brains are constantly working. Our brains are trying to look for and seek out patterns. When we recognize one, we may see that that's a pattern that we have seen before, and that becomes known, unless there's something different about it. It may be similar to us, but there may be a slight difference. And our brains will take note and pay closer attention to be able to identify what, in fact, that difference is. Once that pattern becomes familiar to us, again, that's stored in the known part of our brain, and that frees up more space to pay attention to new information and new patterns. At the word level, we are comfortable with patterns. Then when patterns become more complex, such as the getting to language as a whole, they are still patterns that we recognize. And new patterns will take us a moment to get used to, because the data that we had since been exposed to hadn't yet shown us that new item. Data and theory sometimes conflict with each other and lead to ambiguity. What I see and what I know may not always align. For example, we have a picture of if you see a picture of an animal that does not look like what you expected, so it may be a dog that has some human features, for example.
Discard that.
You would discard that because it's something that's not familiar to you. But if you were to, in fact, take a closer look, you would see that maybe the picture changed the nose from the typical place in the middle of a face and moved it to the cheek. And then you would recognize, oh, in fact, it is a face. That is something that is known, a pattern I've been familiar with. But the data has been misconstrued. Drawings of two faces that are superimposed on top of each other and show a head turning, or maybe show different facial expressions like eyes blinking on the right and then on the left, is depending on which way you look, is another example of a pattern that may be familiar to us but not, because we're not used to seeing faces imposed on each other. When you hear the words gray or orange, you may think of, well, I like orange because it's a prettier color. But in fact, here in DC, I'm asking, are you going to vote for Mayor Gray or candidate orange.
Mm-hmm.
So without some explicit information, people are left with ambiguity. We are also led to make inferences. We make inferences all the time. The data that we are receiving as we navigate our world on a day-to-day basis sometimes leaves gaps in information. For example, there's a building near Georgetown, right in front of the river, the waterfront. So in Georgetown, there is a building along the Potomac River, and I had passed by that building wondering what its purpose was. There's a canal behind that building, and the river, the Potomac River, was in front of it. And the canal was higher than the river that was in front of the building. I took a stand on a peak above that building, and I was able to look at it from a different viewpoint. And I saw the river flowing both in front and behind of this building. And there was something downriver that I could see that was certainly in line with this building. It was near a bridge.
It was the trusses.
And it ended up to be the trusses of the bridge. And this led me to wonder what the purpose of this structure was. It was a very odd looking bridge. There was grass along either side, and it didn't in fact cross the canal. Now, the canal had trails along either side of it. And I later found out that on these trails, individuals would ride along horses with their buggies and carry different types of cargo. But what fascinated me was the design, because it did not coincide with the data that I thought I knew, the patterns that I had been previously exposed to. Because you would expect that to cross a canal, you would see some sort of structure that actually crossed the water. But this, in fact, wasn't built that way.
I wasn't reading it right.
I wasn't reading it right because I had not been exposed to that type of pattern. Now back to the forest.
The footprint. I'm illiterate.
The footprint. I am illiterate to these animals' footprints. But if I, in fact, were a hunter, I might be able to look at one set of footprints and tell you an entire story. I could tell you if an animal was, in fact, stalking its prey. I could tell you if an animal was, in fact, stalking its prey, that it got very close to its prey and that the prey started to run away from its stalker. I could tell you if an animal, in fact, was gliding or had a different sort of gait by the measurement of the paws and the footprints that they made in either the dirt or snow. I could also tell you, in fact, if the animal was jumping through the forest because of the distance between front paws and rear paws. I could also, if I was a hunter and I was familiar with these patterns, could tell you if this animal was running quickly or if they were, in fact, taking their time. There is such a story. You could tell if it was, in fact, a male deer or a female deer just by the paw print that this animal left. Because a female deer has wider hips, therefore their rear paws would have been more further distance apart, and the males have more narrow hips and would have been opposite. My point in summation is that we read the world every day. We need our ability to read, to comprehend the information that we are being exposed to. We don't have to be taught how to read the world. It's something that is natural to us. We are recognizing patterns and developing skills to be able to appropriately and correctly read the world. But that's my question. My most basic question is, why is that same philosophy not applied to those children who are being taught how to learn a written form of a language? Children should be exposed to a written form of language and in some sense be left to themselves to be able to discern the meaning of that language. I come at you with a completely different perspective that we can learn from our human ability to read the world and apply that to reading, especially deaf children learning how to read a written language. Thank you.